Welcome. This is my YouTube channel about non-duality. I'm your host, Russ Rapp, and in this video, we are going to discuss self-improvement. How do you improve the self in relation to non-duality? You've probably seen other videos about non-dual meditation or non-dual yoga. My personal preference is non-dual cereal eating. But before we get into that, I just want to thank you for joining me. And I'm doing this live talk on Thanksgiving Day of the year of our Lord 2021. And I figured maybe there's some of you out there that need a break from your family, or you're stuffed and you just need to veg out and watch a video / participate. So if you are joining us and you have questions, comments, place them in the chat box and I will get to them at my leisure. I myself, we are doing a family type of Thanksgiving on Saturday, so this weekend. So today we're just kind of bumming around the house, maybe grab a bite to eat if we can find somewhere that's open, because we don't want to have to cook, because we're doing plenty of that this weekend. So that is why we're here today, and we're here to discuss self-improvement in non-duality. And I'm going to try my best to stare right into the little black dot so you get the sense that I'm speaking directly to your soul. So hopefully the volume is good. I've noticed that on the laptop here, it usually has fairly good, picks up my sound pretty good. So I'm a little bit further away today. But someday, maybe it'd be nice to invest in a good microphone, because that's the important part of these videos, that you can hear and understand what I'm saying, not just necessarily see the words exiting my food hole. And so I had a lot of thoughts pop up today when I decided on the topic of today's discussion, or the now's discussion. And I think part of it is, I did see a video about like non-dual yoga or something like that. And oh, hello, Daryl. Thanks for joining. So I'm going to keep talking about self-improvement here for a little bit. But welcome. And it just got me thinking about, I think a lot of times it really comes down to definition of terms when talking about this subject. Because when you discuss non-dual or non-duality, or the term non-dual in reference to some sort of other activity, then you're kind of changing the definition of what non-duality is encompassing, because you're using it as a way to add something or describe the activity that you're trying to promote. And it's just another way to try to make yourself sound more important or deeper, essentially. And, my hope in these live talks is that all the things that popped in my head that I thought were worth talking about are communicated in these videos. But that's, as you probably know, if you've seen these before, it's not always the case. But the interesting thing about self-improvement and non-duality, I think you got to ask yourself, why do you watch these videos? If you're new to non-duality, then I apologize, because I didn't really explain what it is. the basic definition is not two. But as we get into this discussion, it'll maybe be a little bit clear as to what non-duality is trying to point towards. But the question you got to ask yourself is, what are you seeking? What are you looking for? What are you trying to get out of these videos? What are you trying to learn or understand from non-duality? Because I think oftentimes people come to these matters as a way ultimately to change something about their own personal situation, their life. They want to get rid of negative habits. They want to be happier. They want things to go their way. They want to quiet their mind. They want to have better relationships. They want to find the connection to higher spiritual truths. I think, there's probably not that many people that come to this just from a basic desire for truth, if you will. I think there's usually a lot of personal motivators that bring people to this subject, and me, I guess, included in that, because I know Daryl in the past a few times has asked me why I make these videos, and I could find the words to try to describe my motivations, dig deep and really take a close look and review at my life as it stands right now, and try to understand what I'm here doing this for, and what I get out of it, and what I hope to get, to give to you, to provide to others through this process. And, I could come up with probably a handful of different reasons, but they all are personal in nature, whether it's trying to help people or trying to just have an expression or communicate or connection with others on a specific kind of a niche topic, or trying to feel like I have to energetically relay the things that internally take place, that I can kind of creatively express that to you. So it's maybe like a creative outlet, but at the end of the day, the motivators, I guess, don't really matter to some extent, because that's not what non-duality is about. Because the truth of non-duality, and we talk about it in conceptual terms, but it's not about necessarily changing anything or improving anything. Daryl says, I think you do the video simply because you enjoy it. Yeah, and I agree with that. And sometimes I don't make videos because I don't enjoy it. So it kind of, I guess you could say I'm ambivalent about making these videos. But I don't believe my motivation is necessarily becoming famous in and of itself, or getting followers, or having people say how great of a person I am, or look up to me as a spiritual teacher, or any of that sort of thing. I think I'm pretty clear on that. But I do, obviously, when you do communicate with others on these terms, these universal type discussions, it's I think there is a motivator to try to reach as many people as you can, just because of the interconnected nature of the talks that we have. And I like the setup of this type of situation where I'm able to free flow my thoughts and just express myself kind of without being interrupted or ignored. I guess I can be ignored because you just don't watch the video, but it's nice to be able to have that level of perceived control over the communication situation, versus trying to coordinate a dance of others in the conversation to some extent. But there is that level of connection through the chat, which I like. And I think those types of conversations, interpersonal, whether it's on a video call, like I've seen like Paul Hederman and some other people do Zoom calls and stuff like that. And I think those are valid and have a purpose because they happen. or just, in the 3D world, having conversations with others is, having, whether it's a retreat or some sort of event. But I like doing these live talks. I don't necessarily, when I make videos that I record, I don't want to necessarily ramble too much, because then since it's a definite one-way communication in a large sense, then I don't want you to feel that, I didn't put any effort into it to communicate those ideas in that sense. Daryl says, what? You mean I can't kiss your feet? Dang. Laugh out loud. Yeah, that's not what I'm doing this for, I guess. And part of my reasoning is I just don't particularly like the guru mentality. And so, from a branding, marketing perspective, that's, kind of what you get is the everyman real deal. That's what I'm portraying to you, because it's natural. It's not a put on. I could do a put on and talk directly into the camera and talk really slow and quiet and make you think, wow, this is the only moment that exists. Everything is perfect. Everything is what is. There isn't a moment outside of this. That kind of a thing. Because if I feel like doing it, I would, but, that would be somewhat of a put on. But I think that's what people look for, is that connection with others. And that kind of goes back to, Daryl says, I appreciate your natural approach. Well, thank you. That's what I'm going for. But that's, with the main topic here we're discussing is self-improvement. And I think that's a large, if you were to categorize non-duality, I think spirituality and self-improvement are the categories. And it fits in line with, those are the types of books I've enjoyed in the past. So that's kind of my interest, I guess, in those areas, which is part of the reason why I'm here. But I think, with the people that stumble upon non-duality in whatever way it occurs, in the conceptual sense, in the way that we describe it, not necessarily just those moments of understanding, the moments that don't happen. But when it comes to people that come here from this standpoint, there's a certain maybe type of person or an understanding or a need that it needs to be filled. And so I think self-improvement is a big part of this. So it's like, what can non-duality teach me? What can I get out of it? And, ultimately, non-duality is not going to give you that. I think the beauty of it is that it's expressing the lack of the need to be fulfilled. It's the recognition of fulfillment itself. The recognition of what is. And, but I think the natural inclination of the self is to make it about your life and your purpose. And so in a sense, that type of mentality is just another reinforcement of the overall mindset that permeates just about everything we do from moment to moment, is this belief that we are somehow separate, that we are somehow, in a sense, and that's why I think people are more likely to promote this idea of we're all in this together, or unity, or that sort of thing, because there's no need in that concept and that framework to really take a hard look at who you believe to be yourself. And so when you say oneness or unity, the assumption could be in that discussion that the separate self, the parts, the pieces of that oneness, the part that you call yourself, me or I, is able to continue to exist in the sense that we believe it to be. And then we just add all those separate me's, all those separate selves together, and we get this concept of oneness. And so I can continue to be what I think I am, what I believe to be myself to be, while, proclaiming that I'm part of everything else. And so it's, in a sense, kind of more of the same. And I think in the same terms, it's kind of, when you talk about unity or togetherness or oneness or whatever, however you want to frame it, the inclination is to, how do you say, take your own perceived will, your own perceived independence, whatever word you want to call it, your soul, your mindset, your worldview, and to externalize it, to extrapolate it out to everything else. And so when it comes to oneness or unity, it's unity based on my beliefs, my worldview. And so, when it comes to consciousness, it's the need of the separate self or the individual to maintain that sense of separation, and yet be able to grow the perspective out and to have this, all knowing, all being, all seeing, all powerful type of an existence while maintaining the separate self. And so you want to basically take this small little temporal casing of what we determine to be who we are, and make that be everything. And so it's, there's when it comes to consciousness or meditation, it's, how do I open up my seventh chakra in order to perceive the world in a different way, to perceive everything, to know everything. I want to be all wise, all knowing. I want to be able to see the future and the past. And it's all about trying to meet the needs of the separate self in those terms. And so if you can play into that, if you can try to sell that as what you're giving to other people, to the other me's, then the me's will eat that up with a spoon, and they'll say, yeah, teach me how I can be a schmuck, but then also know everything and be all powerful and run the universe. And it's like, maybe you should go the other way and look at who you determine yourself to be. Let's see. Daryl says, Russ, did you know that universe means one song? Universe, one song. Yes, the word of God. Yeah, it's very interesting, the makeup of the universe. And I'm glad you pointed that out, because, there's a lot of connection to kind of the structure of music and sound and tone, vibrations, energy. There's a lot to that. And so calling it a song, I think is quite appropriate. Obviously, they talk about multiverses as well, but I was watching, I'd seen this a while ago when I was kind of flipping through, and I saw this like high school kid talking about, 4D consciousness versus 3D and 2D. And I'll just give you a quick synopsis of what he was talking about. So like 3D, we experience the world in 2 dimensions. And so like our existence has, length, width, height, 3 directions essentially. And so there can be a in front and a behind on different planes. And so like from an objective object standpoint, there can be something that is perceived to be in this location, and then there's something else in another location. And the 3D space allows for that understanding. But when you look at something, you're not necessarily looking at, when I'm looking at my hand, I'm not looking at all sides of my hand. I can only see in a 2-dimensional space. Everything else behind that is covered. And so, when it comes to like a 2-dimensional being, how that experience is, on a flat piece of paper, there's only 2 dimensions. And so how do they experience that one point of consciousness, if you will. And without trying to get off into a total like mental activity, essentially kind of how I would see it is, how do we describe a fourth dimensional view on a 3D world? Partly is that it's this experience of being able to see all sides at once, seeing everything in its entirety without kind of separation of perspective. And so, I can see like a 3D printer, I can see the outside of whatever I print, but the design itself is able to print everything, all the workings inside this one object. And so I know that conceptually. So it's almost like, CAD design or something like that, where we're able to cognitively picture something in its totality from an outside perspective, from a higher dimension, if you will. But I think that kind of discussion is looking at it from a 3D, 5 sense type of a perspective. That's how we would perceive what it would be like or experience to have a fourth dimension looking at a 3D world. But I would say another way to consider it is, we look at everything from like scientifically as an objective world, but we don't necessarily see the interior side and see the connection between the two. What I mean by that is we have a brain, we have synapses, we have electrical impulses, and we can map that. So we can put on the little nodes and they can map, brain science, see what's happening in these different areas and look at that, but they can't dig in, they can't build. And maybe that's something we'll get to, who knows, but they can't see what you're dreaming. They can't see what's happening in your third eye, what you're envisioning. They can see it from, particle standpoint, but to see the experience of it, the internal part of it, that sort of thing, whether it's emotions or thought forms, it's almost like the other side of the veil. And so essentially there's this, the idea of connecting the two between the external and the internal, and essentially knowing the inner nature of the essence, if you will, of the world around you. And so that's kind of sometimes how that would be a good way to describe non-duality is having that understanding of the essence of everything that appears, if you will. And so knowing that there's that connection, it's not like necessarily like mind reading, knowing what's happening internally, but there's an understanding or awareness of that this cup has the essence and I'm aware of it. There's a connection to it. There's no separation within that. But I think, from another perspective, those internal thought forms and feelings that we don't necessarily see from a 5-sense standpoint are still external in a large sense. So, when you meditate and you watch your thoughts, you watch what your brain does, in a sense, you're objectifying, you're externalizing that experience, and therefore it becomes an object in the sense that what the perceiver is separate from what is being perceived. And so when it comes to that sense, everything outside of what isn't, the nothingness, the ground, the basis of reality, everything outside of that is appearing, is temporal, is something that you can't observe. And so you can never see the observer, essentially, is kind of what it comes down to. And so having that understanding, because I think a lot of times, especially when you're talking about self-improvement, to get back to the topic at hand, when you're talking about self-improvement, a lot of times it's a real hyper focus individually on on how you react to the outside world, your emotions, your thoughts, your instinctual nature, your drives, your desires, your motivations. And it's kind of a consideration of that. But if you see that from a perspective of observing those behaviors, observing those feelings, those thoughts, then it becomes an externalization. Therefore, there is a way to be kind of objective, or see it for what it is, if you will. And so I guess non-attached or unidentified to that, because when you identify with those thoughts and feelings or behaviors or definitions of yourself, then it's hard to really be open or free to make those changes, to make those improvements, if you will. But the different, or the other side of that, since when you're talking non-dual, you're discussing things in two sides. The flip side to that is also true, is that when you have, when you're trying to do the work and you're trying to improve yourself, there's also this recognition that nothing needs to be changed. And so even through the process of change, through self-improvement, there's a recognition that you are perfect as you are, and what is exactly the way it should be. And so even though you're trying to, because I mean, let's face it, when you're trying to improve yourself, and a lot of times it appears to be a battle, whether it's something external in the outside world that you're trying to go up against, or it's just typically a lot of times it's your internal, whether trying to find the motivation, determination, or courage to do the things that need to be done. That can feel like a battle, but with the truth of non-duality, you can go into that battle with the realization or the reassurance that whatever the outcome, you are what is, and that is perfect in and of itself. And so the existential threat of challenging your beliefs about who you are, or your current behaviors, or current attitudes, trying to change those, the ominous threat that all poses is lessened in a sense. And even the sense that the threat itself, when you battle your natural inclinations, or the habits that you've built up over time, it can seem like us versus them, me versus myself. There becomes this perceived duality of one that is trying to change and the other that is trying to stay the same. And that big battle of identification is what a lot of people struggle with when it comes to non-duality, because it seems like there's another side to you that you're struggling against, and you want to kind of unify those two entities into one. And I think the key of that is to realize that the illusory nature of the battle, and that love, infinite love, is the bond that we all share together. Julio Salinas says, "Hey folks," well, hello Julio. It's great to know that one can do nothing wrong. Yeah, that's great. But I think the other side of that is that there's kind of, I think non-duality can denigrate into some intellectual form of anarchy, if you will, where sometimes you have to burn the whole thing down, or the assumption is you have to burn the whole thing down in order to be your true nature, if you will, or advance or improve as a unified whole, if you will. And I think that's I think what in one of the Enneagram books I read early on, I think it was Riso and Hudson one, they talked about the unenlightened Buddha, where an unenlightened Buddha sees the unification, the wholeness of reality, but then subscribes to some method or form to demonstrate that versus realizing the true nature of what is, whether it's becoming ascetic or, like I said, having some sort of view that I can do nothing wrong, therefore there's no ethics or morals or anything like that. Because as I've said in other videos, I'm going to get into this in a minute, but I'm going to refresh my tea here, that the non-duality includes duality, and I'll explain that here shortly. But I'm going to get some more tea. Julio says, yep, it's also a deep hole of lack of meaning of some sort. Yeah, it's the meaninglessness, especially when you read Course in Miracles, they say we give life all the meaning that it has, and so the meaning of life kind of goes out the window, and then you're kind of lost to some extent, or you feel lost. But I'm going to cover a little more on that in a second. Before I go here, I'll be back in a minute, but Augusto Morant says, I'd like to discover how to unravel the mental conjunctions that create substance, dimension, time, concepts, and presence, see or seen, and all the forms limited by this conjunctions. I think it could be a way to explore the ecstatic reality in opposition to a static one. What is the meaning of meaning, says Augusto. So with that, I will be back. I appreciate your contributions. I'm back, or did I ever leave? Who is me? Who am I? Do I exist? What is the meaning of meaning? So the other thing I wanted to discuss is non-duality in relation to something, but I just slipped my mind. There's just this, says Daryl. Let's see. Let me get into my non-dual meditation mode and remember what I was going to say. I remember. I do like the line from, that's a line from the second Matrix, but from when Morpheus was talking to Jada Pinkett Smith's character. Well, it's been a while. Who can tell me the name of, I don't know if it's Jada Pinkett Smith now, but Morpheus's sort of girlfriend in the second Matrix. She flew the Logos at the end into the Machine City. Regardless, she said that line, but he also said in, I think when they met the Merovingian, Morpheus said that, I think Neo was like, did we do it right? Did we mess that up? And how do we know we did what was the right thing? Morpheus said, well, we did because we're still here. Something to that effect. I butchered it. Those are good movies. It's basically a non-dual type of a discussion in cinematic format, along with a bunch of other stuff thrown in there: symbology, imagery, spirituality, religion, everything, consciousness. It's pretty amazing that some people can criticize the second two films to some extent in comparison to the first one, but just the fact that they were able to pull that whole thing off in such a succinct, compact piece of art is quite amazing. But it still goes to the fact that you don't necessarily have to change anything, whether it's yourself or others, when it comes to non-duality, so that you don't have to become more non-dual, or you don't have to necessarily, blend the two sides of yourself. You don't have to become something that you're not. You can embrace exactly what you are. And to be perceived as one way doesn't necessarily mean that you're somehow less non-dual or less, awakened or less realized, if you will. Well, what I was going to talk about is the idea of non-duality and encompassing duality. And, when you talk about morality, it usually gets separated into good versus evil, right versus wrong, and those types of discussions. And so when you have non-dual discussions, there's this idea of, well, it's all, relative. It's all, matter of perspective, and there's ultimately no meaning. We give meaning to good versus evil, or right versus wrong, and that sort of thing. And I think to some extent that's true, but ultimately, and I think I want to watch another movie that I think I watched it once, like when it came out, is I Heart Huckabees, if that's the right one I'm thinking of. But I believe that whole movie is about non-duality, even though they don't use the phraseology, because I think there's kind of two separate families. One sees everything as oneness, and one sees everything as separation. And I think that's going to be my next movie choice, but don't tell the fam that. So when it comes to non-duality and duality, oftentimes in discussions, people separate those two into two different concepts. So is duality real? Is non-duality real? And ultimately, one of the two has to be real. So if you can't point to non-duality, if you can only describe what it's not, or if you can only point out what it's not, and as a way to try to describe what it is, then it's like the ultimate unknown, the ultimate void, the ultimate mystery, if you will. And so how do we even know that, people call it nothing. Nothing exists, nothingness, we're all empty, blah, blah, blah. And those are just words, but it's all kind of describing the same thing. Or like there is no self. But when it comes to non-duality and duality, the two supposed in these discussions opposites, one is true and one's not true. But let me look at your comments quick. So we have a little conversation, it looks like, between Daryl and Augusto. Daryl says, laugh aloud at non-dual meditation mode. Never seen it, sorry. Augusto says, it will be a new one soon, I think. To love every appearance, including your own dynamic of personality. Mind can't grasp it, but mind is an activity of it. Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of what I'm getting at here is one is true between non-duality and duality, and one is what is not true. One is an illusion and one is real ultimately. But one can include one and the other does not include it, the opposite. What I'm getting at is duality does not believe in or include non-duality. So non-duality is not real to duality. It has no meaning, no purpose, no manifestation. It's nothing. So from a dual perspective, from a personal 3D in time and space perspective of me versus you, self versus other, from a dualistic perspective, non-duality is nothing. It doesn't exist. It's not real. It's kind of the cosmic joke. But duality can't prove that. On the flip side, non-duality is not necessarily saying that there is not duality. It's the recognition of the absolute, if you will. And so you can make relativistic, dualistic statements like everything is relative. It's all relative. So time and space, our perception of time and space implies self and other. The only way that we can understand ourselves in the universe is through this idea of me versus something else. And so time is essentially the change between objects, if you will. And so the only way that you have an experience of time or an experience of existence is by having this time and space separation. And so to make an absolute statement like everything is relative, then that in itself is an absolute state. And I'm probably not explaining this very well, but if you dig into, if you look at, if you pick apart, if you try to go, turtles all down, what's at the basis of reality? It's turtles all the way down. I think that's the saying. If you try to dig into the core, the root, if you try to fall down the rabbit hole, what's at the bottom? If you discover, like if you look at, in science, if you look at an atom or, the essence of matter, and you get down to molecular and atoms, and then what's in an atom, you got electrons, protons, neutrons, and that's quarks, blah, blah, blah. And then ultimately we assume it's basically empty space at some point. It's just a field of energy, moving essentially. But do we know it's empty space? No. But it's kind of like when you look at your mind, when you look at your feelings, your existence, in all aspects of animated space-time reality, is all temporal. It's always fleeting. You can never grasp onto it. There's nothing that you can solidify in an absolute sense. And so it's always a bunch of moving shadows. It's always something that is here one moment, gone the next. And so there's, the habitual nature of reality that makes us perceive moment to moment, congruence, a structure, a cause and effect, a way the world works, that we see as being something that's structured in a way that gives life to our identity, life to our reality, because there is that consistency to what we perceive. And so when you have life constantly moment to moment, like, so if I move my hand from here to here, there's a continuity between the actions. And so I can say, this is my hand moving from here to here. And so I describe this as a hand. And so it becomes a thing, it becomes an object, something that we can abstractly use words to describe. There's a consistency to behavior. So it's not like it's here one moment, gone the next kind of a thing. So there's this habit that it is here and it is always going to be here until it moves. It gives this sense of animation, of life, essentially, that is structured. So if life was so chaotic that there was no stream, no continuity of movement in relation to others, then the identity can never really be fixated on anything. But if you've ever tried to stop time because you weren't ready for the future, you'll know what I'm talking about, because the concept of time never waits for you. And so things are always moving, things are always changing. And in the moment you try to solidify something, you try to magically conjure up something permanent, it doesn't work. It falls apart. Everything degrades. Everything is turned, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Everything returns to what it was. But the basis of that is always there. It's always consistent. The ground of being. And that's kind of what non-duality is pointing to. And if you look at an analogy like this, I guess this laptop would be a good one, where the screen, the hardware, the laptop itself is essentially the basis of this two-dimensional reality that I'm currently observing. And so, I can see my image on the screen that is always moving, and there's meaning to that. So here's my hand and I move it across the screen. And so that has an appearance of reality, but the only way that reality exists is because of the screen itself, the background that you can't see, because I can't, in this fake world, look at the screen and go, oh, I see, I'm stuck in a two-dimensional reality. This is great. I can see this. Like, you can never see the screen. So like, me as an outside observer looking at a computer screen in this two-dimensional reality, I can point to it and say, oh, there is a screen, because I can see it. But when it comes to there is no outside entity looking at our 3D reality and saying, hey, look, there's the screen. As the image on the computer screen, this reality that I call real, that I call myself, can't ever see the screen. It's not possible. And so then the assumption is that the screen of the computer doesn't exist. But the truth of the matter is that none of this would exist without the screen. And so the assumption, the implication of non-duality is always ever present, whereas dualistic reality is always changing and never really real, if that makes sense. But that doesn't mean that duality doesn't appear to happen. It's an illusion. And so, like Guns N' Roses said, or the serpent in the what was my saying from last time? Satan is the serpent of seeings. Seemings. Satan is a serpent of seemings. Oh, I can't even say it right. Satan is the serpent of seemings. There you go. It's probably too much of a tongue twister, so it probably won't catch on. But essentially, those that want to manipulate the temporal world, the world that doesn't really exist, the illusory world. You have to basically, if you want to have power or control within that world, you have to have people believe that it exists. And so it's all a matter of, it's magical, it's magic, it's belief, it's control of people's perceptions and minds. And so that's how, in a world that's an illusion, that's how you get a perceived sense of power, by having basically a lie told to others and have people believe it, if that makes sense. All right, so let's see. I got through my little stream of consciousness there. And let's see what we have in the chat. Let's see. Lewis Smith, welcome. He says, much love and glad to see you back in my notifications. Yes. Daryl says, what is mind? Where is it? It can't be found. Julio says, we are also conditioned to think that there have to be something at the bottom. Reality, in quotes. Whatever that does not have to be what we expect. Daryl says, also conditioned to think, believe that we are somewhere inside this meat suit. Julio says, yep, and that one is supposed to be a subject in the first place. Yep. Augusto says, the illusion is not necessarily equivalent to a lie. It hides a hint of reality. The illusion is not necessarily equivalent to a lie. It hides a hint of reality. The appearance direct to the ground of appearances somehow. I think there's always an awareness of the truth of non-duality, or the basis of reality. And so that's where there's always this attempt to cover that up, whether it's internally through the mind or others in the external world. Because, like I said, there would be no picture show, there would be no movie without that basis. And so the assumption of that connection is always there. Like in the third Matrix, the one gentleman program in the train station tells Neo, what is love? It's a word, but love describes or implies the emotion or the connection that it implies, something like that. And so I say "and so" a lot. So that's where the basis of reality, the truth of the matter, the truth of what is always ever present. And so it shines a light on the pale glow of the illusion, if you will. And so people want to avoid that in a lot of sense, because then it destroys the narrative of you, essentially, and challenges the ultimate basis of your existence. And that can be scary for people. But it's beautiful. It's good news. Daryl says, this character somehow feels deceived, though. Julio, yeah, laugh out loud. It's like there's something wrong. Yep, a splinter in your mind. Julio says, or something less preferable than other things. Daryl says, yeah, heavy side, but nothing. Julio says, but nothing wrong to go along for the ride. I think it ultimately comes down to this idea of having faith, this, the courage to be comfortable in not knowing. I think whether it's some outside force deceiving us or we are deceiving ourselves, the mind has a role to play. It has a function. It does what it does. It creates meaning at every turn. From moment to moment, it builds the reality that we perceive. So that's the function of the mind. And it's not necessarily a deception in a negative sense from a value statement, but it is what it is. And so, you may feel deceived, but that is just, in a sense, more pressure that you're putting on yourself to have to know, to have to understand, to have to believe what is not perceivable. And so, how can you believe something that it's just, whether you talk about, the concept of non-duality or the idea in a belief in God, it's kind of the same thing. How do you believe in something that doesn't seem to appear? How do I believe in a God that I can't see? And so, oftentimes you have kind of a motivation to be able to have direct contact with the perceived God, and however that manifests itself, because then that is a way to be able to solidify your faith through, seeing is believing, essentially. And so if you can see it, if you can have connection, if you can have communication with a higher being, or if you're able to understand, have an epiphany of what non-duality is trying to portray, then all of a sudden now everything fits into place, and you can go about your life knowing that everything is great and perfect, and that sort of thing. But if you look at your own personal intellect, consciousness, your own soul, whatever you want to call it, the separate self will never grasp what non-duality is trying to teach. And so to some extent, it's kind of like trying to short circuit your system in making you so ultimately confused, that your attachments are kind of loosened, and you're able to be open to what is, have an openness to life existence, and not as travel lighter, as Paul Hederman says. And that's where there's that opportunity in these discussions to have that as kind of an experience. But that ends up becoming, the goal in and of itself, as a way to release from everything that you're holding on to. And none of that's necessary in a non-dual sense. Julio and Daryl having a good back and forth conversation. Trying to understand this, but there's, like I said, there's nothing really to understand. That's probably our need in this moment to try to grasp that, because when you're grasping at something that can't be grasped, then it feels like you're falling constantly. Julio says, yes, on the other hand, I don't think we can discard things. Everything seems equal. Yes, I agree, says Daryl, but it seems very different at the same time. Julio says, words are a requirement for a good story, though. Yep. Augusto says, I think it is possible to realize that nothing can make you happy, but that nothing can make you unhappy either if you stop identifying with a separate self. Let me read that one again. I think it is possible to realize that nothing can make you happy, but that nothing can make you unhappy either if you stop identifying with the separate self. So that's okay. I think that goes along with kind of what I was discussing at the beginning of this talk. Is there's a need in these discussions about non-duality to get something, to free yourself from something, to understand something. And in that sense, you're talking about happiness. And so the goal of you trying to wrap your head around non-duality is that you either want to be happier, or to be less unhappy. And so the means to that end, if you will, is to stop identifying with a separate self. And so in a sense, it's kind of like, wanting to live life without your skin, where maybe you don't like, your skin tone or something, and you want to like remove it. But if you were to like remove all your skin, everything would just fall out on the floor and just plop out, and you'd be dead. And so it's something that you can't rid yourself of. And so what the goal of the separate self then becomes to somehow bring about the end of an identification with itself. And so it's kind of a circular reasoning where the separate self tries to get outside of itself and not identify with itself. So the more you try to stop identifying with the separate self, the more it becomes prevalent in your perception of reality. And so, yeah, the idea that, so I guess I would say to that is, you are who you are, and you have a personality and a life, and you have habits, and you have what you perceive to be yourself, how you define yourself, and that's how it is. But it's not something that is permanent or absolute. And so, it's not about, non-duality isn't about trying to change yourself or to try to get outside of who you think you are, or to try to stop identifying with your perceptions. It's kind of in a sense, a radical acceptance of what is. And so you don't have to change anything, and there's nothing wrong with being unhappy or being happy, or things that make you that way. It is what it is, I guess. And then Daryl says, what is happiness? Augusta says, but who you will be then if you are not a separate self? But who will you be then if you are not a separate self? That's a good question. Julio says, I don't think we can change that. Augusta says, a lack of sense of lack. Julio says, it's sort of the we are in a game with no exit. Daryl says, that's not bad, Julio. I think it's like having no desire. No, so yeah, So that again, I think it's like having no desire. It's because in some sense there may be a perception, and I'm assuming, but there may be a perception that desire is judged or seen as a bad thing. And so, like when you desire something or someone, there's this sense of uh, implied separation where there's something that you want, there's something that you need. And so if you're not fulfilled in our culture today, if it's not instantaneous or quickly received, then there's a sense of going without, that you're not you don't have the object of your desire, and there's a recognition of that. And so negative emotions are naturally to go along with that sort of thing. But in a sense, there is a reason for desire, especially when it comes to desire from a male female perspective, because without the emotion of desire, we wouldn't exist. Essentially, human beings would not continue to procreate. And so it's not the sense of desire, because I remember one guy I saw in a video at some conference a long time ago talked about how he had no sexual desire anymore because he's non-dual. And it's just like, sure, great. So that's the goal of that, because you see having desire in that sense is a negative thing, and being rid of that is somehow better. Like, what if you didn't have the choice in the matter, and all of a sudden there's this flatness? It's kind of like taking certain SSRI drugs, as far as like trying to antidepressants or that sort of thing, and you don't have the highs and lows, but you just have this flatland experience of whatever. And so it's not necessarily trying to avoid the highs and the lows or trying to avoid desire. There's nothing wrong with desire. It's hard for me to keep up on the comments here, but I'll just pick a few here. I think I actually have to wrap it up here pretty quick. My dog desires to go to the bathroom pretty soon, so. Well, I guess I'm glad there's a lot of discussion going on in the chat. That's makes this more fun. Is there any final thoughts? I gotta wrap this up here. Tara says, thanks for us and all. Julio says, great, say hello to Doggy. His name's Cooper. Augusto says, thank you, love to hear about this. Well, thank you for joining. It makes these talks very enjoyable to have some inspiration from the chat. And if you are watching this after the fact, you're obviously, if you've gotten this far, you've probably already subscribed or are going to subscribe to this channel like right away. So I don't even have to tell you to do it, but yeah, so I probably won't do another live talk this weekend, but maybe the following weekend. So Julia says it's cool that it's a little forum. Yeah, it's good. At some point, if there's a lot of back and forth, it's gonna be hard to keep up. So I may just have to kind of pick and choose going forward. That's probably a good thing. I don't know if I'll get to the point where it'll be streaming so fast that even you guys can't keep up on what's being said because it's so quick. But that's the beauty of having kind of a smaller group in these types of chats. So we'll see what the future holds. The future that is always in the moment, I guess. All right. Well, thank you, and happy Thanksgiving. And until next time, peace.